So I just wanted, so everyone, welcome to SharePoint or Microsoft 365 Philly, day 2. Our first speaker for this afternoon is Joel Oleson, works as a director at Proficient, and he's going to give us an overview of the latest with Project Cortex and all the things about it. So go ahead, Joel, take it away. If you want to add anything to that, feel free.
Yeah, no, it's great to be here. This is definitely a topic I'm very passionate about. I do think the Project Cortex is a major investment in the right direction by Microsoft. Um, you could say they're absolutely a leader in the AI space and doing a lot of the right things. And when you talk about how Microsoft has kind of taken so many different technologies and put it in the hands of the enterprise, it's this kind of democratization of AI is really what I see with Project Cortex. And if there's any SharePoint people who are in the crowd, which I expect is probably most, I do think that Project Cortex is probably the best thing that has come to SharePoint for a long time. You could say, Teams absolutely brought kind of a new way of consuming files and data from SharePoint. And Project Cortex is kind of brings AI to SharePoint. It brings AI to the knowledge management space where we've been working with, and it really transforms the space. This is digital transformation for SharePoint, I believe. Really exciting stuff. So without further ado, a little bit more on my intro. I do love to travel. If you know anything about me, I like to start my sessions with recent trips. And what's funny is, or not funny, COVID has basically got us down, right? My last trip was actually to Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Syria, and Lebanon. Really kind of crazy fun trip. That was a SharePoint Saturday Istanbul trip, and really enjoyed connecting with the community in Lebanon as well. So that was awesome, and it knocked off a few new countries for me on that trip. A little bit about I work for Proficient, big partner. Not here to necessarily tout them, but definitely we've helped a lot of customers get to the cloud and help. We have a very decent practice in the Microsoft space, doing a lot with both Azure, Dynamics, and Microsoft 365, both from adoption as well as consulting. So the topic for today, I really want to help people understand you don't have to wait for Project Cortex. There's actually things you can do today. Yes, it's in private preview right now. Yes, we should absolutely have it in our hands, but I think that COVID kind of threw off the timeline. I do have a slide at the end that talks about availability of GA and what Microsoft's latest, even based on Inspire, that's happening today. So there's a couple of new announcements. In fact, I just got off the office hours of Project Cortex just now. So hopefully I've got the latest and greatest for you. Try and stay plugged in. If there's anybody else who was on that Project Cortex office hours, a lot more data about the managed metadata and about taxonomy and the developer APIs and that kind of thing. Primarily what I'm going to focus on today is helping you understand what it is, why you should care, and helping you understand the things you can do to prepare for it. So you're going to notice that in this particular slide, I'm basically telling you what I'm going to tell you, that there are things that you can do with your environment, like getting from classic to modern, like getting rid of your 2010 workflows is a great one, which isn't on this list. But basically modernizing your environment such that when Project Cortex arrives, you can take advantage of it. Even with managed metadata and taxonomies, there's kind of a classic versus modern. and Microsoft has actually been updating that behind the scenes as well, even in Power Platform. If you've got people who are ramping up on Power Platform, that is actually also going to help you with your adoption of Project Cortex, because it ultimately takes advantage of the AI models. It takes advantage of the classification type of work. I mean, ultimately, what Project Cortex is doing is it helps you with your filtering, grouping, classification. Obviously, it's building ontologies, and we'll talk about kind of what it does. But the more that you can do to, like, say, enabling Microsoft Search, populating acronyms, helping there be data such that when Project Cortex comes into the environment, it has data to work with. It's not just the files, it's actually a little bit of that structure that can really help. If you've got sensitive data, that data should be classified. So then when you say, hey, I want to leverage Project Cortex, but I want it to not look at this sensitive data. Well, if you've got a label or some way of being able to say this classified data is something we want to ignore in this first release of Project Cortex, you being able to kind of take advantage of a structure that you put in place before. Now, one of the myths is that you need to do tagging. There's absolutely no tagging I would recommend from a human perspective, but from a sensitivity labeling perspective, once Project Cortex is in place, you can do more with Project Cortex to discover based on labels or even doing labeling itself. But if they're sensitive, say, site collections or sensitive teams, that kind of thing, you want to be able to be aware of that. So when you set up your blocking inside of Project Cortex, so you can say, focus on this, ignore this, the kind of the white label strategy. And then from a planning perspective, we talk about roles and responsibilities. Hey, when this thing lands, or even getting your head around it, ownership is a great thing to kind of think about. The roles and responsibilities, file plans, things like that. Who manages the taxonomy and manage data, metadata, these new content types with the new more modern content types as an example. And then there's all sorts of identifying and discovering, do you have any structured scanning that's going on in your enterprise? Where is the systems of record, essentially? So being able to kind of take advantage of understanding where you're going to have the most value when you implement Project Cortex can really help. And if there's any kind of, say, green initiatives or kind of paper to digital or even kind of digital transformation in enterprise projects where you can take advantage of those areas. But absolutely, any kind of cleanup projects are going to make life much better for Project Cortex as well. You don't want it to learn based on things that are no longer applicable. Maybe there's data in these repositories, but you don't necessarily want it to be building its initial structure and ontologies based on old, ancient data. So what we want to do is we want to first talk about AI in the enterprise and kind of what this bigger movement is, and then understand what Project Cortex is, understand the business value of what it brings, and then we're going to loop back on this idea of preparing for Project Cortex and understanding how can you accelerate what it actually does and how you can have a more successful Project Cortex deployment. So yeah, AI. I think when I think about AI, I think about the future, but that future absolutely is now. When you think about how many, all of these top companies are investing in AI. Just one quick story for you in this idea of AI. When they first started building computers who could play chess, it took a while for the first computer to learn chess and then to beat the players in chess. Then we had the AI that could beat the grandmaster over so many games, and then it was now there's nobody who can beat AI in chess. And so they then moved on to Go, and Go was meant to be the ultimate uh, strategy game. And it was like, okay, well, let's see how AI does it Go. And it took a while. Again, it kind of learned up through the ranks and was beating the grandmaster at so many, and it was a big day when it actually beat it. But now humans can't beat AI at even Go. So it's really fascinating. And I'm sure there's a bunch of articles I could share with you on that story, but that would give you much more detail. But it's fascinating how we now have these supercomputer AI that absolutely have kind of surpassed intelligence in very specific areas, and it's fascinating. And I'm sure we could pontificate on this topic, and I'd love to discuss it. But AI in the enterprise, just think about what that can mean in terms of unlocking your data and democratizing data, being able to make smarter decisions, and what can AI do for information, knowledge management, connecting people to knowledge, understanding what is in our enterprise corpuses, what is in SharePoint, what is the knowledge that we can glean from it. And that leads us right into this, one of my favorite quotes, especially that I think relates about what AI can be doing for us and what organizational intelligence and what that can actually mean. So Lou Platt, who was the former CEO of Hewlett Packard, said in 1987, if HP knew what HP knows, we would be 3 times more productive. Think about that for a second. If your company knew what it knows, so it's this question about what does the company know? What is the company collective knowledge? And if we actually knew that information, how much more productive could we be? How much more, successful could we be? How much more could we produce? What does it mean to the bottom line? What does it mean to so many things in terms of being much more efficient and so on? And I think that the stats, when you start talking about the the amount of data, obviously this isn't a session about data and analytics, but if you talk about just how much data there is, 90% of data in existence has been generated in the last 2 years. Doesn't that just sound insane? But then when you look at the numbers, you understand, oh, it's talking about all these office documents and faxes and how every person is generating 1.7 megabytes per second in 2020. And absolutely, we you think about even just in our consumer world, how much data we're generating with videos and audio and files and the social media posts and images and structure. We're pushing out way more than we ever used to. And you think about IoT, all the data that's being collected and pushed in an enterprise level. There's so much data that's being gathered. We have so many more points of information as well. So that aspect of our ability to, instead of digging into the files ourselves and trying to find information, if we can actually sit on top of that data and understand what is, we can be so much more effective at our jobs. I love the Indiana Jones, who doesn't? Especially as a traveler, I sometimes identify with this idea of, the professor who has kind of his day job, but then, when he leaves the office, he goes out into the world and has these great adventures. I'd like to kind of think of myself as a as a modern Indiana Jones sometimes. But this idea, when you remember in the what was it called? The Indiana Jones movie about the Ark of the Covenant. They found it, And at the end of the movie, you see the box that it's in, and then it zooms out into the warehouse. And it's basically got a little barcode or some kind of classification on it. But now, all the greatest treasures in the world, and we're relying on metadata to be able to find that. You think about the treasures in your enterprise, that gold, that's actually stored somewhere in SharePoint, somewhere in some IBM repository, somewhere in the cloud somewhere. Our ability to be able to retrieve that, we're relying on search, or we're relying on, some tool to be able to help us be able to retrieve it. And the problem is it's only accessible as how well we tag it. Well, what if we didn't do such a good job when we put that data in there? In fact, what's fascinating is there's some analysis even of museums where you actually have experts who are classifying minerals and the treasures of the world for museums, and they suggest there was one study that I saw suggested that I forget if it was definitely more than 20% of rocks and minerals and the world's treasures that have actually been miscategorized. And you think about these museums where it's the world's treasures, and we're relying on metadata, and it's super common for there to be miscategorization. Humans are not so good at categorization, and the retrieval is just super poor as a result as well. So, and I think when you go back to the enterprise, you say silos of knowledge. Yeah, search and discovery has continued to fail us. It's the best we've got, but it gets better and better with each iteration. And is Project Cortex going to solve this all for us? I don't know. It's going to do better. It's going to be able to do more mechanized tagging. It's going to be learning, and it's going to be consistent. The problem with humans is we are so inconsistent. The way one person tags it versus the next person. You can do your card sorting exercises in the enterprise just for your intranets, just to be able to say, can we tag the stuff that we even know about that we want people to be able to find? And you can spend weeks or months just on trying to make the stuff that you know about discoverable. There's so much untapped knowledge, so much that's in people's heads, and then people leave, they walk outside the door, and there's that knowledge drain of the organization. And when you talk about it generation-wise, you've got a ton of people who are young and entering the workforce who have all sorts of interesting ideas. You want to ramp them up as quickly as possible. And on the other end, you have people who are exiting the workforce, and they're bringing that knowledge with them out the door. How do you make sure that it's captured? And you as well, we all know that especially with crazy COVID times, people are entering the workforce and leaving the workforce at will all the time. And those skills, the knowledge that they learn, is walking right out the door with them. How do we tap into and preserve information? Now, this knowledge, I like to be able to categorize it into these two buckets. We've got tacit knowledge. The tacit knowledge is your experience, your thinking, the competence. It's your commitments and deeds. Those types of things are what's in your head most often. How do we get those things out of your head? Sometimes those things come up in conversations. When you're chatting on Teams, or when you're, having a phone call, or, there's somebody who's new and they're asking a question in a forum. How do we capture that Q&A? How do we turn that into explicit knowledge? Explicit knowledge being the documents, records, files, it's the stuff that's in the structured databases as well as in our files and records. And even now, more and more, it's what's in videos, it's what's in photos, it's what's in our 3D scanned content and images. Our ability to tap into the explicit knowledge that's been captured versus those experience types of things that often are not captured, but that should be converting to explicit knowledge, that turns into repositories of knowledge that can then be linked back to and enhance our information. And this little quote in the corner, people are certain valuable resources, but the information they hold is useful, but far more so if shared with others. How do we encourage a culture in our organizations of sharing? And then that going on top of that is, hey, if we can get people to share, how do we as well get people to share in such a way and then get it captured? So we're going to talk about how Project Cortex really, really resonates, I think, with these messages as well. So ultimately, what is our goal? Our goal here is to connect people to knowledge and knowledge to people. And a lot of the case studies that you'll look at on the Project Cortex site are focused on this simple message of connecting people to knowledge and knowledge to people. How do we do that? Well, in the Microsoft world, we have the graph, the knowledge graph, the people graph, the files graph, the expertise graph, all these insights, content, knowledge, expertise. You think about all these connections that can be made when you start talking to Microsoft, and when you spend time digging into this, you realize the power is actually behind the scenes in the graph, where it's actually taking, whether it's your taxonomies or taking this managed metadata type content, your content types, those things are all being tied into graph, so it can build relationships between people, your content, the knowledge that's stored there, and the insights that it gains as a result. You know, the analysis essentially. I love this this quick chart when you start talking about who has been investing in AI. Absolutely, it's Microsoft, Alphabet, which is Google, Intel, Qualcomm, Apple is on there, Amazon's on here. When you start talking about who is filing patents around AI, over 154,000 AI patents have been filed worldwide since 2010. You talk about this wave of insights and knowledge and really getting the computers to work for us. That's this deep learning, neural networks, all this work that's going into this stuff. Cloud makes it possible. Cloud makes it so much more possible. And you can see Microsoft's way out there in terms of AI research focused on deep learning. Dominant. So here we are, an opportunity to work with Microsoft on, I would call, their crown jewel as it relates to AI. This is the first off-the-shelf kind of product in Microsoft 365 related to AI. You know, there's all sorts of APIs. There's all sorts of, you know, you can do this with cognitive services. You can do that with cognitive services. But this is an application that's designed around, built on top of all of the work that Microsoft's doing in Azure. So when you start to dig in, you'll see Microsoft's built a ton of these APIs, vision APIs like facial detection, object detection, understanding emotion. There's computer vision, you know, all sorts of cool stuff around language, understanding language, understanding analytics and moderation and translation, bunch of search cool stuff like visual search, video search. You know, what used to be in videos used to be locked up. You didn't know what was in the video until you actually opened it up. But now they actually have, with some of this deep learning and cognitive AI, they can tell who's in the video, what they're talking about, because they're doing text to speech, and then really even understanding what is in those, because they understand object detection. Super, super powerful. All this stuff is just now really making it at the forefront. And what's interesting is all these APIs are being integrated right into Project Cortex. Project Cortex is built on top of all of this really powerful work that's being done. around cognitive services. All the really cool speech type things, like understanding who is speaking, because you understand their face, and you can tap into the knowledge of the expertise aspects of that, the knowledge, the image search, the graph, Azure search, and this isn't. While Azure Cognitive Services is out there, enterprises can take advantage of it to build all these really super amazing. You really have to just kind of figure out what is it, but Microsoft has actually built a product on all this kind of cool stuff. So it makes it much more tangible, easy to work with. And then when you start saying, well, what does Project Cortex bring to the table? It actually takes advantage of all of that and adds on top of it automated object detection, knowledge summarization, forms processing, file classification, entity extraction, a bunch more advanced AI kind of capabilities where you take all those things and it's actually making sense of your content. So let's dig into, okay, we understand why AI means so much to the enterprise. What is it? What is this tool that Microsoft has built? Well, the first little screenshot we're seeing is, this is from the Knowledge Center. We're looking at a topic page, and you can see, the files that are related to it, the ontology and connections between that topic and other topic, sites that relate to it. It's a project, this one, and so there's a start date and a release date. And again, so here we are in the topic center. We get an overview, which is a summarization by the AI. We got all the experts. We have the files that have been added, and as well as how they've been done it, as well as discovered resources. So those discovered resources are the files that AI has actually discovered around the topic, and in addition to the ones that have been validated. Pretty incredible stuff. And we're going to jump into a demo in just a second, but let me stop here. Notice at the top, we are in SharePoint. Wow, okay. So SharePoint has a new place with Project Cortex, enhanced by Project Cortex, called the Knowledge Center. The Knowledge Center, and you can see the button, or the little bubble right in the middle, is a node for construction operations reliability. And then you can see all the related topics to it, including suggested topics, curated topics, and the size of the node based on the number of related topics. So basically, your ability to navigate across topics and AI's ability to understand the relationship between these topics. And it even does kind of lines based on how strong those connections are. And I know I'm kind of just throwing you in at the deep end, but incredible what AI can do as it understands your data, understands the topics of your content. So it's actually reasoning over your data, coming up with what topics it thinks that they are, based on your taxonomies, or based on seed taxonomies, or even based on suggestions that it's making that, like you say, the ones in black have been validated. Humans have validated those topics, where the ones in white are suggested, and the humans can then go in and say, yes, Mark 8 is a project. It's a topic that we actually care about. We are doing a bunch of work around Mark 8, including there's a team around it, there's a site around it. There are experts related to it. In fact, there's a team called Mark 8, and now we can see that, oh, they have a space. And there's a number of different Power BI charts and reports that are related to that, and files and so on. So our ability to kind of navigate across the enterprise. Now, one of the first things you might say is, oh, well, I've heard about Delve. I kind of understand what Project Cortex is doing. No, you don't. Delve was a project that was done in Microsoft a while back to kind of visualize the relationship between people and files, right? And there was some idea of these boards you could create to kind of connect some of the files and so on. This is a complete rewrite. This is something totally different than Delve. Project Cortex is AI-based ontologies of topics, and it's this powerful connection between people and knowledge, and building out these knowledge graphs. So when you start talking about this better together, people and AI, it can help you, right? It allows you to collect end user feedback on relevancy and context on topics. It encourages contribution. You think about it, if you said, hey people in our company, we want to build a taxonomy of all of our knowledge and we want to connect our sites and files to that knowledge, you get a lot of pushback, or people saying, that's impossible, we're never going to agree on what the topics are. And that's the truth. There's so many companies who've tried to build enterprise taxonomies who have really struggled to be able to get something that really makes sense. And they'll have meeting after meeting after meeting just to be able to build organizational taxonomies, because they can't agree on terms, they can't agree on topics. But when you have AI suggesting topics, it's much easier to say yes or no. It's much easier to say, we do know these things. Now do your reasoning and your filtering and your summarization based on these topics. And AI can actually make it so much more democratized and make it so much more simple, because it can suggest, like in these cases here on the left, you can kind of see which one's relevant. I come up with these two things. There's more than one project related to them. This one's focused on a system. This one's focused on an oceanic project. Which one of these is correct? You can pick and choose and even have multiple topics that relate. So you can kind of get loops back for general feedback and disambiguation around topics and so on. Really kind of cool stuff. Now, the way that Microsoft has kind of simplified this idea is it says, in fact, I love this one-liner from Microsoft. You want to put, what is Project Cortex? It applies AI to automatically organize your content, deliver innovative experiences through topic cards, topic pages, and knowledge centers in Microsoft 365. I think it's even better to summarize the fact that, yeah, even though they said Outlook, Office, and Microsoft Teams, there's all sorts of stuff related to SharePoint, definitely in Word, in Yammer. They're really expanding the capabilities of how you can tap into Project Cortex. And there's even AIs to the back end of these things, especially with Graph. Your ability to work with Graph is really powerful. The other side of this equation, you see somebody who's feeding paper into a machine. When you think about knowledge being ingested, or essentially there's somebody who's saying, yes, we want you to reason over this data. So you're specifying the data you want it to reason over, you want it to look at, and it can then highlight, it learns from it, it highlights the content, and you can essentially build business processes based on what it's discovered. So you talk about how the Power Platform takes advantage of all this content extraction where it can actually populate metadata and so on. Really, really powerful. So kind of a very simple way of looking at this. We're connecting people to knowledge, tapping into these shared topics and resources, experts in the context of work. There's the content processing side of it, categorizing content, automating processes, and then there's the compliance side of it, connecting and managing content to improve security and compliance. If you've got AI out there and you can say, hey, I want you to look for these things, and if you find them, I want you to actually change the classification to highly classified. You can basically have it go out and discover content that actually should be secured such that it can be unavailable to people who shouldn't have access to it. And whether it's, even think about it from a DLP perspective, it's like, hey, if there's a driver's license, a security card, and so on, or even within chats, you think about it from a compliance perspective, Project Cortex goes beyond where DLP leaves off, and the two can actually work together from a compliance perspective as well. Classification and labeling and all that kind of jazz. Especially since it's tapped into so much of this AI. Somebody may have talked in a video about something, and your ability to be able to classify the videos, as an example. So all this is built on top of Graph, Microsoft AI, the cognitive services, and the content services of Microsoft 365. So with that, I actually want to jump into the demo. And conveniently, Microsoft has built a site. And to get to this site, if you just type in your browser, aka.ms/Project Cortex, and it's not case sensitive on this one. And yeah, you'll notice there's /Inspire 2020. Definitely, that's one of the ones I mentioned at the end. But yeah, with Inspire happening, a bunch of new announcements related to the development and content types and taxonomies and so on. Check out the Inspire announcements as well. So when we go to this site, this is basically a hub for all things Project Cortex. You get a new kind of updated definition and the pitch. Forget about first half of 2020. They need to update that line. All right, so we look, yes, there are monthly office hours. Actually, it just happened about an hour ago for June. Next month is another office hours. So you can actually sign up for those. There were some announcements at Build. You can go check out those. The Build was about a month ago. Go check those out. Chris McNulty and Naomi and Rajesh both kind of talked about things. You can register for details. So when it does get released, whether you're a customer or a partner, you can request access. And then we have, yeah, don't let the form scare you. A lot of people, when they see a form, they think, oh, that must be the bottom of the page. You actually have to keep scrolling to get to where the resources are. And on here, you get kind of a 90-second walkthrough of Cortex. There's a Microsoft Mechanics Live, which is a deep dive from Naomi from last year. What we're going to do is we're going to jump into these demos. And I think a lot of people have seen this Empower People with Knowledge. I highly recommend that one as kind of a first level one to do. The newest one is this content capture one, which is the one I'm going to show you. The organized knowledge is a great one around, it shows kind of a PO scenario. That's a great one to be able to show. We're going to jump into this one, the content capture. Really, for SharePoint people, this is a great one to kind of show the power of these classifiers and your ability to kind of take advantage of Project Cortex here. So here we are, we're looking at a content center. So if we go back to what is Project Cortex, it has knowledge centers and content centers. There's really kind of two main ways we interact with Project Cortex. It's got its feelers all over the place. You know, the knowledge feeds from these two places essentially. So we're going to go ahead and jump into this content center, which is the one that's more about machine teaching. And you know, there's basically a model that's been set up for this library. You can see the different entity extractors that have been set up. We're going to create a new entity extractor. So an entity extractor essentially can understand what's in a document, and we can train a model on how to understand our contracts. So basically, in this situation, we are a consulting company, and we're going to be loading some. We can basically let's first create our entity extractor. So here we are. We're looking at a bunch of contracts. You can see in this example, we've got some that are services, some that are consulting. but we want to train, right? So this one has already been, there's some examples here. So this is a services agreement. We're looking for the term services. So these are highlighted terms. And basically you can, in this case, we're gonna select that services is what we want. We're gonna train these, okay? So basically we're looking at phrases. So basically we're choosing phrases. We're looking for the word agreement, and it's on our phrase list. These are words or phrases that can help the model identify data that you'd like extracted. So in a services agreement, agreement is a key word, right? It's something we really care about. It can be case sensitive or not. As an example, there's different types of contracts as well, including this phrase list. And now it's been trained, and we could add some from our library. In the situation, we're now going to publish the model, and we're adding it to an existing library. We're going to add contracts. See, we've added the model to it. We can now upload documents. We're adding a bunch of these contracts, and fairly quickly you can see that it's starting to pull in, and it's filling in that this is extracting metadata out of these documents based on the model. And there's a number of different models that are applied here. And here you can see, here's an example of the agreement. This is essentially a template that was created, a consulting agreement between this person and this person, you know, kind of a simple free text type of experience. It's not a hardcore structured form, fairly free text, but it knows to look for the word consulting and the word agreement. And essentially, now we've uploaded all those contracts, and you can see it's extracted the contract company, the contract value, the contract type, and the types of services just based on terms that are in those. We're not talking PDFs that are highly structured, fairly unstructured documents that we've been creating as part of our consulting agreements and services agreements. Now let's look at one in detail, and sure enough, we can see over here, this Word document has extracted all this data, including the contract value, companies and types, and so on. Imagine what this could do for your SharePoint environment, where you have these semi-structured documents, where in the past, you'd be trying to say, hey, everybody, you need to put in the value and the company and the contract services. Now you can basically set it up, extract all that stuff, and even have different types of contracts. And it's classifying and extracting, filtering, grouping the content. Pretty interesting, kind of cool stuff there, huh? We'll jump back into our deck. There's a couple of other visuals around what Project Cortex is doing. Smart ingestion, knowledge summarization, organizational learning, building AI models for insights and analytics. I do like this kind of visual. You've got all sorts of different types of content. There's, what better description of what SharePoint is, right? You've got all your documents and pictures and videos and audio and all these different types of PDFs and Word docs and Excel, blah, blah, blah. They all come in. You're basically pointing it at that content, saying, hey, it's okay for AI to look at this. It tags it, it organizes it, it finds it, it adds content management capabilities across all these digital assets. And what is it doing? What is Project Cortex doing? It's ingesting it, it's classifying it, extracting based on machine learning and machine teaching, both on what it knows and how it understands, and then what you've taught it. So there's the machine teaching side, the content center we were talking about, building out insights and analytics for the organization based on supervision, and the accuracy can be improved. It actually gives you accuracy score, so you can actually train it. It can give you positives and negatives and even non-examples. So what does the architecture look like here? Project Cortex is available across SharePoint, Teams, Yammer, Outlook, Word, and so on. It's even exposed through search, where people can discover knowledge. So really, there's a lot of entry points for the end user. And what are the things that people get? Topics cards, topics pages, topic center, the content center, where we focus on the demo, where you can do forms processing, machine teaching, and so on. But not only M365, you'll notice there on the bottom left, external data sources. There's all these content connectors, connect to your content, bring it in. Let's ensure security and compliance for the external data. We all sorts of manage metadata, computer vision, and then all this stuff built on top of graph and AI. Really, really amazing stuff. What does it look like to users? Here's an example in Teams. I'm having a chat with somebody, they use the word Project Core, and here's a little topic card that when I click on Project Core, it pops up. I can see the people, I can see this is an acronym, and there's a definition for the acronym of core, and there's additional resources. So that's just one example inside of Teams. There's also same kind of thing in Word, same kind of thing in SharePoint. And with the time we have, I don't really have time to jump into all those other demos. Highly recommend you go spend some time, if you thought that was interesting, going and checking out some of those other ones. Now, the other thing I want to spend a little bit of time with, especially as we talk about preparing for Project Cortex, the roles. Who are the different roles? Well, we expect, this is a slide from Microsoft, we expect that there will be some kind of admin, some kind of content services persons. Maybe it's the Project Cortex admin, maybe it's a content services admin, but they're more focused on validating what AI is suggesting back. They're handling service requests and monitoring the service health. They're assigning access. They have rights to the content services. You've got a knowledge manager who's responsible for the quality of information. They're doing the resources to be mined. They're basically setting up the rules, the structure, the visibility. And then you have your subject matter experts. They actually work in kind of a small way. These aren't dedicated roles, this bottom one for sure. They basically are curating the knowledge in a very specific area. So it's their responsibility to essentially own a set of topics, or be able to kind of validate the files and what's being curating certain areas of knowledge, as an example. Now, when you talk about what are the human elements of Project Cortex, it is setting up the allow sites, block sites. What do you want to avoid it looking at, like being able to say no crawl or no index type settings. Your topic generation, whether it's providing taxonomies and term sets and acronyms, highly recommend from a preparation perspective that you do invest in taxonomy, that you do invest in acronyms for search, because it can absolutely take advantage of that kind of work. It will enhance your taxonomies, absolutely, but if you've got some seed taxonomies, it can really help with Project Cortex. And so on. There's the curation of topics and validation, the viewing, confirming, rejecting kind of work. I mentioned external connectors. There's 6 or 7 different Microsoft Search connectors. There's hundreds of connectors from partners like BA Insight, as an example. Here's an example. Below, you can kind of see from a search perspective, whether you're talking about SharePoint or Teams or Windows or Edge, Microsoft Search is kind of creating this search experience that spans across SharePoint to Bing to Edge to Windows. There's kind of that vision for what Microsoft Search could be doing. And then you see below that the ability to tap into SharePoint, the external content, Teams, answers from Yammer, Azure AD, emails. Project Cortex even taps into email as well. You get an email from somebody and you're like, what's Project Core? You can click right on it and pull it right in. I know we're getting short on time. I want to give you a couple of visuals, and then we'll move to some Q&A if we have time. Project Cortex. In a nutshell, this is my favorite kind of visual. This is one I put together with a designer to help understand what is Project Cortex. On the left-hand side, you have the knowledge center. On the right-hand side, you have the content center. It's machine learning and machine teaching. And then you have the admin experience there, which is the seeding, their taxonomies and acronyms and so on. You're validating what and kind of doing reinforcement to what AI is doing. So what is AI doing? It's extracting, filtering, grouping, clustering. On the machine teaching side, you're doing training, classifying, modeling, setting up your automation for business processes, and so on. Pretty cool kind of. I put together a little bit of an infographic. What are some good value pitches? Empowering teams with knowledge and expertise, streamlining business processes, allowing you to discover information across various platforms, connecting your people to knowledge, knowledge to people, AI for harnessing collective knowledge, empowering organizational agility, automating, extracting, and tagging, a bunch of different things you could say. Think about how many people describe their SharePoint environments as kind of a dumping ground, or it's kind of a it's not necessarily a garbage dump, but you can absolutely say there's hoarding that's going on where people don't necessarily do a good job of sorting through that. Can you imagine a human trying to go through that? And this is just one person's one room. When you talk about an entire city and saying a human going and sorting and organizing all the houses inside of a city, it's impossible, right? Well, that's our enterprise. You can't have a person or even a team go and organize the knowledge of an organization. It's impossible. It's like looking at a city. How do we do all that? Well, Project Cortex, the classifiers, the extractors, the tagging and connectors and labeling and capturing, leveraging Power Platform as well. Really powerful stuff. Don't oversimplify what Project Cortex is and think, oh, it's just the thing that highlights the words. No. Don't assume that it's just this knowledge center and it's just the highlighting thing. That's oversimplified. The elephant in the room, nobody really wants to manually tag documents. AI can solve that. Highly recommend the seeding. And it takes us back to planning for Project Cortex. There's some tactical preparation you can do around doing some data cleanup, setting up what should your labels be such that when Project Cortex comes into place, you can actually do your labeling. Microsoft's been doing a ton of work on modernization of the managed metadata service. What is a modern, some people haven't touched their taxonomies in 5 to 10 years. Maybe it's a good time for you to freshen up those enterprise taxonomies such that when Cortex comes into place, it can do it. Planning, it'd be great to understand who would be the owner of Project Cortex if you guys were to mess with it. If you even just do a POC, who would own the POC? It's great to have that ahead of time so that when it does land, you're ready to go. With that, I want to leave you with, we're happy to announce the Project Cortex will go into production for existing private preview customers on August 1st. We now have a date, for a very specific date for existing customers. And then for the rest of everybody else, the rest of us, you can expect additional details about general availability at Microsoft Ignite 2020, which is in September. Interesting. So hopefully, they are still pushing out some of the private preview to additional people. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but yeah, definitely go jump into the forum if what you saw today is compelling. Go to aka.ms/Project Cortex. That's where all the demos and everything is. Put /project or Inspire 2020 at the end of that URL if you want to go see what the Inspire announcements were. So Let's connect. Any questions? We probably have room for like one question. If you, I can, if there's a way to kind of capture those, if your moderator wants to come online, we can talk about what's possible.
Hey, Jeff or Joel, thanks a lot for sharing all that great information coming from a knowledge management world. That was pretty fascinating. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for people to provide feedback and certainly post a question. And Joel and I'll be able to see it. We do have a minute or two here for questions.
Great. And do you want to read those to me, or I guess I can now try and pull them up? Oh, I don't see any yet. So anybody who has questions, feel free to post them in the chat. I am now looking at questions.
Okay, and if anybody can use their scanner to scan those to provide feedback, that would be great. And Joel, do you want to go ahead and make an announcement and just put that URL one more time in there? I know you said it was aka.ms.project cortex, but if you want to stick that in the announcement or the Q&A, and I'll publish that, that would be great. So there's one question. Do you see any organizations investing in the roles effectively?
You know, I actually have not. I think that Mott McDonald, they're one of the case studies that Microsoft has published. I do think that they're definitely taking this seriously, and there's some great examples. Highly recommend checking out their video. If you go to aka.ms/Project Cortex, you can actually watch their video. In terms of roles, I think that there are some companies who actually have taxonomists, so they may be more prepared for this. I think that I've been in a couple of large enterprise organizations where they do have kind of a knowledge group or people who are responsible for file plans or responsible for organizational knowledge in charge of IP. They often run say knowledge centers and things like that. So there may be some things that translate a little bit better. I think the medium-sized organizations will probably look to their SharePoint staff or even Teams people and say, hey, can you guys manage Project Cortex? But I think what we really need is to have champions in the business to be able to help drive this effectively.
Great. So hey, just a follow-up. So two things. One, in order for you to have Project Cortex, you must have Azure as your cloud provider, correct?
Essentially, it's part of MS3. It's part of Microsoft 365. It does leverage the Power Platform. It leverages SharePoint. It leverages Teams and Yammer. From a licensing perspective, they haven't really talked about the relationship between Azure at this point. It does take advantage of a lot of Azure stuff, but yeah, in terms of licensing, they haven't necessarily revealed that yet.
Okay, and then one follow-up would be with PII. So with a lot of this AI stuff, and now with the GDPR, you know, that's kind of comes into a question with some of these larger international companies now, and especially with the U.S. now, you know, inheriting what has been done in Europe. How does PII impact what's happening with Cortex?
It can actually help you in your initiatives. So basically, it can you leverage and you can teach it what to look for, so it can actually label or classify, and so yeah, absolutely, it can help you in your GDPR initiatives.
Great, thank you.
Yeah,
thanks for that. That was a great session. Really powerful stuff. I'm really looking forward to seeing what Project Cortex has moving forward, especially as it comes GA.
Yeah.
But and thanks for your time. If people need to reach out to you, what's the best way?
I'll throw it in the chat. I'll give you my email. But definitely, you can easily find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, any of your favorite social media. It's not too hard to find me.
All right, perfect.
But yeah, feel free to email me, or let's connect on LinkedIn for sure.
All right, sounds good. All right, thank you. We're gonna go ahead and move on then.
Thanks
when
a lot.
you're in there. All right, have a good one.
Yep. Bye.
Bye bye.